There has never been a better time in the whole of the history of Scotland than right now for you to educate your children at home. Hi there, I'm Christine, welcome to the channel, and today I'm going to talk specifically about Scotland and specifically about the whole concept of home education in Scotland. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little bit about the history of Scotland from a book, and the book is called A Christian Survey of World History, and the author is a preacher whose name is R.J. Rushdoony. And I'm going to read a section from chapter 2, and the title of that chapter is Ancient History and Christianity. Now, please bear with me. I think it's 3 paragraphs long, so yes, it is a wee bit of a read. Okay, so yeah, it's 3 paragraphs long, so I'm gonna read it quite slowly. And these 3 paragraphs are written after quite a detailed recipe for haggis. So here we go. Now, of course, this goes back to character. After all, a Scotch, or I'm going to say Scottish, he uses the word Scotch, I'm going to change that to Scottish. A Scottish proverb is that you need salt with porridge. In other words, you don't put sugar in your porridge. That spoils a person. It makes them soft. You put salt in your porridge. So adversity is something they like. That is, we Scots. When it's talking, R.J. Rushdoony was American. Something they like, and luxury, such as sugar, is something they dislike. To cite another thing, which might not strike some of you in the best taste, but I think is very revealing about the Scots. In the islands of Scotland to this day, they regard it as a mark of being soft and effeminate, a weak English type of character. If you have a wee hoosty in the back of the cottage, a wee hoosty is an outhouse. Now, I'm going to say I've never heard of a hoosty, but that might well be the case. Any vigorous Scot takes a 2-mile walk out into the heather, and this is their way of life. I mean, I actually don't know if that's true or not, that in the islands, whether people did prefer to go for a 2-mile walk for the toilet. I mean, I know my own mum was brought up in extreme poverty, and she was delighted when finally her dad was able to afford to build a house for them, because they were living in close to destitution. So I'm not sure that people preferred to take a walk into the heather. Nevertheless, I'll continue. And this was their way of life. Of course, the saying is that during World War I, the reason why the Scottish Black Watch was such a terror to the Germans was that they were always looking for that 2 miles of open country when they charged over the top. Well, I've taken a little time to go into this about the Scots, because what does it all reveal? There are people who today are prosperous, but they still have the same national dish. They still have ways that mark them all over the world. Anthropologists have said that the 2 people who have gone into more areas of the world carrying civilization are the Scots and the Jews. And there is almost no point in the world where you travel where you don't find the Scots and the Jews have gone in and contributed to civilization, even the outposts of civilization. And of course, if you go back to the history of America, you find that most of your schools and colleges were started by Scotsmen. A very interesting fact. And this is interesting because you might understand why There are Jews everywhere, being that they have historically been an important people, being that Jesus himself was a Jew. But what does that say about us Scots? Okay, so and the second point, he's making the point that the Scots have contributed to civilization all over the world. And a second point that I want to make is thinking about the British Empire. Now, whatever your opinion on the British Empire, there's a lot of competing views about whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. That is not the point I want to make. What I want to talk about is the size of the British Empire. The British Empire was massive, and you know that phrase, the sun will never set on the British Empire. That is because at somewhere in the world where it was daytime was a part of the British Empire. That's the point of that phrase. And Britannia rules the waves because the whole of the British Empire came about because Britain was a seafaring nation and could go anywhere by sea and take any land just about through its navy. So at the peak of the British Empire, London was the number one most important city in the world. And at that time, Glasgow was the second city of the empire. That was its name, the second city. And so my question is, what on earth has happened? What has happened to Scotland? What has happened to Glasgow? I don't know when you were last in Glasgow in the city centre, but I can tell you it is not a nice place to be. It's a dying place. I was in Edinburgh on Saturday, and it was thriving, a completely different atmosphere. It was full of holidaymakers. It was rammed with people from all over the world, very international, people who were there enjoying the city. There were things about it I didn't like, lots of tatty souvenir shops, but there were stalls in the city centre. The restaurants were busy, the streets were busy, and there were people everywhere. This is not the same as Glasgow. Glasgow doesn't have that buzz about it that Edinburgh does. So not only is Glasgow not the second city in Britain, I would even wonder if it's the second city in Scotland. I mean, to be honest, I don't know what Aberdeen, Inverness or Dundee particularly are like these days. I've heard good things about Dundee. I've heard that Inverness is expanding at a rate of knots. I haven't heard such good things about Aberdeen. But it wouldn't surprise me if one of those could compete and overtake Glasgow as the second city in Scotland. So the question I'm asking is, what on earth has happened? What has happened to us as a people? What has happened? Glasgow, Scotland, was renowned all over the world for its education. People everywhere knew that Scotland had an extremely high standard of education. For many, many years, Scotland had 4 universities, which were Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen and St Andrews. And to some extent, you could perhaps say Dundee, in that Dundee University is a kind of outpost, was originally an outpost of St Andrews. For a tiny, tiny nation, 5 million people, to have 4 internationally renowned universities is quite something. But what has happened to us? We're not that people anymore. We're not that people. We're cowed. We're bitter. Always looking at somebody else to blame. You know, it's the fault of Westminster. It's the fault of the English. No willingness to look at ourselves and say, what have we done? Why have we got to this point? So, of course, that brings me to the solution. What is the solution then to this problem that we have found ourselves in? And you know what I'm going to say. I'm going to say it's educating at home. The Scottish people need to move away from this model of education. And I could list the problems that I have heard even in the last 2 or 3 days, about education in Scotland, state education in Scotland. You don't have to look very far, you don't have to scratch very far beneath the surface to know that it's absolutely failing. And again, there is no short-term solution. The solutions have to be long-term. They cannot be, we're going to do this year, we're going to do this decade. No, this is a generational issue, and we need to be thinking long-term, generationally. And where can you start right now? Well, you know what I'm going to say. It's by educating your children at home. It's building that character in them. It's having them think big. Who can I be in the world? How can I add to the productivity, not only of my own nation, but of civilizations across the world, which is what Scots in the past obviously did. Not only were they prepared to work hard for Scotland, because Scotland had a tremendous amount going for it. It was tremendously instrumental in the Industrial Revolution because of the high standards of education, because of the high standards of thinking. And on top of that, as I've read to you earlier, Scotland had much to contribute to civilization across the world. So now's the time to start. Now's the time to give your children the best and start to think about the future of Scotland and improving Scotland as a people. Okay, thanks a lot for listening, and I look forward to speaking to you next time. Bye.